Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we have a pretty terrifying experience shared by a man in Hong Kong. This incident happened while he was riding the MTR one night. A quick note before we jump in. A lot of you have reached out asking if I could talk more about some of the beliefs that pop up in these stories, especially for those of you who aren't as familiar with Chinese spiritual traditions. It can feel a little mysterious or even confusing when things like Yum Yuern, known in the West as third eye, comes up. So, here's how we're going to do it tonight. First, we're going to dive into tonight's ghost story. After that, I'll take a few minutes to go deeper into the cultural side of things. If you've ever wondered why some people can see ghosts and most of us can't, or what it really means to have Yum Yuern Ahn, I'll be breaking that down right after the story. So stick around. I think you'll find it fascinating. Alright, so let us dive in. Have you ever heard of a haunting in the MTR, that's Hong Kong's subway system? Unlike New York's MTA, which runs 24/7, the MTR shuts down each night, usually around midnight, depending on the line. After that, it's closed until the next morning. This story comes from a man living in Hong Kong. He shared this experience from a few years ago, and it left a lasting impression on everyone who's heard it. Let's call him Albert. Albert claims to have Yum Yuern Ahn, the third eye. It's rare, but it's not unheard of in Hong Kong. Albert's had this ability ever since he was a little boy. It's believed that most children are able to see spirits up to the age of 6 through 8 years old. Whether they know it or not, this age is said to be the transition period to when they start losing the ability. By age 10, most children have already lost ability entirely. The exception are people with Yum Yuern Ahn. Albert used to see spirits a lot more when he was younger. Now that he's older, the sightings still happen. Just not as often these days. It's more occasional, but they do still show up, especially during certain times of the year. He added that most of the time it's actually pretty difficult differentiating if what he sees is a spirit or a person, because not all ghosts are like what we see in the movies. They don't just float up to you and scare you. Most of the time, it's much more subtle, as they usually keep to themselves. They look like regular people, doing regular things. You won't really know unless you really look closely at what they're doing. That's when you'll start noticing that something might be off. This is why I mentioned earlier that children sometimes don't even know they have this ability, because unless the spirit they see really sticks out to them, it's very easy to mistake the spirit for just another person in a crowd of people. Albert was 30 years old when the strange event happened to him in July. Years ago, he worked in finance at the time, the kind of job where late nights aren't uncommon, especially when a deadline is coming up. At this time, his company was rushing to finish a new project. So for nearly a week straight, Albert found himself clocking out well past 11:30 p.m. That meant catching the very last or close to the last train home before the MTR shut down for the night. He always boarded at Yamada Station. Back then, it was the last stop on the Green Line. It's not anymore. They've since extended it, but at the time, it was the end of the line. This night was no different. Albert stepped into the end car and took his usual seat, one of those end spots near the glass panel. He liked leaning his shoulder against it. During the ride, it was late, and as expected, the train was nearly empty. Maybe 5 or 6 other passengers scattered across the car he was in. As the doors closed and the train began to move. Albert leaned into the glass and let his mind drift as he started to unwind from the long day of work. That's when he noticed her, a young woman standing at the far corner of the car, right next to the door. She had her head down, and she was wearing a red windbreaker. He couldn't see her face, just the top of her head, and the way she just stood there completely still. His first thought was, maybe she was just dozing off. But then he glanced around. The car had plenty of empty seats, so why was she just standing there? He didn't think much of it at the time, other than it was a bit weird. She chose to stand rather than sit, when the train was basically empty the next night. Albert worked late again. This time he almost didn't make the last train. He was sprinting through the station, tie-loose laptop bag, bouncing at his side the moment he stepped in through the doors. They closed shut behind him, cutting it close. Breathing heavily, he made his way through the nearly empty cars to his usual seat, the familiar end spot by the glass panel. At the end of the train, he sat down, exhaled, and wiped the sweat off his forehead. That's when he saw her again. Same girl, same spot she was standing, in the same exact position as the night before, in the corner by the door. Head tilted, downward, motionless, still wearing the same red windbreaker. She was not browsing on her phone, not looking around, not even shifting her weight, just standing there. Now that's when it started to feel a little off. So that night, Albert made a quiet decision. He was going to keep an eye on her just to see where she got off during the ride. Albert kept stealing glances at her, just subtle shifts of the eyes, trying not to be obvious. But she didn't move. The entire ride. She stayed in the same exact position, head down, hands at her sides, like she was frozen in place. Passengers got on and off at random stops, but not a single person seemed to acknowledge her. It was like she wasn't even there. No one brushed past her. No one gave her a second look. Finally, the train reached the last station, end of the line. Everyone had to get off. Albert stood and kept his eyes on her as best as he could. He saw her step off the train, but by the time he got out himself, she was gone now. At this point, Albert still didn't think anything paranormal was going on. He figured he just lost her. In the shuffle. It was late. People were tired, and she must have slipped into the crowd. That's what he told himself. Until the third night, same time, same routine. Albert got on the train and headed straight to his usual seat at the end next to the glass panel. But tonight, the girl wasn't there. Maybe she didn't work late tonight, he thought. No big deal, exhausted from the week. Albert leaned his head against the glass, shut his eyes, and took a little nap. 2 stops past the sound of shuffling feet. Passengers getting off stirred him awake. It was mostly people leaving the train now. Very few were getting on. He rubbed his eyes and glanced around. That's when he noticed a couple sitting across from him. His side of the row was completely empty. Just him. The train then slipped into one of the dark tunnels, and that's when he saw it in the reflection on the glass. Albert saw himself sitting there, but he also saw someone else sitting next to him. A woman. She was in the seat directly to his left head, turning toward him, smiling. Albert froze. He quickly turned his head to the left. The seat was empty. He looked back in the reflection. She was still there. Same posture, same smile, still staring straight at him. And then her mouth slowly began to open wider and wider until an impossibly long tongue slid out, curling slightly at the end. It wasn't human. No way. No one's tongue should be that long. And that's when Albert knew this wasn't his imagination. He was really seeing something again, even if it was only through the reflection. This time he didn't react, just looked downward, pretending like he didn't see anything. Maybe his body language gave something away, because the couple across from him, they noticed a sudden change in demeanor. The woman nudged her partner. Both of them glanced at Albert, and then at each other. And then, without saying a word, they stood up and quietly walked out of the car, into the next one. Similar to what most people do when they see a crazy person on the subway. Suddenly, Albert felt the left side of his face go numb. He turned slowly to the window part, doing his chest. And in a reflection he saw it. Her tongue was resting against his cheek. She hadn't moved an inch in the reflection, still sitting there, beside him smiling. But now her long, unnatural tongue was pressed right against his face. Albert felt a wave of dread crash over him. He wanted to cry. He wanted to stand up and just run to get as far away as possible. But his legs wouldn't move. It was like they didn't belong to him anymore, completely frozen. So he did the only thing he could. He shut his eyes. He couldn't bear to look anymore. About a minute passed. Felt like forever. Then the train pulled up into Golongtong, one of the bigger interchange stations. More passengers began to board. Normal people chatting quietly, scrolling on their phones. Albert slowly opened his eyes. They were out of the tunnel now. So the reflection in the window was faint, but still visible. She was gone. He looked around quickly, scanning the car. Nothing,